Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Rojas, the Cincinnati 2030 District Director. Thank you guys for all coming out and joining us today. Today we have M&A has joined us to talk a little bit about what is our workplace going to look like after this pandemic, or when we return to our workplaces. And so today we have Johnna Keller and Bryan, who will be joining us. And I'd like to also note that M&A is not only a professional partner, but they're also one of our building members. They have in Cincinnati. So we are very happy to have them here today. A couple of housekeeping items. Today, I'd like everybody to mute yourselves, and if you have any questions, please feel free to fill out your question in the chat box. The chat box is located at the bottom of your screen. You can type in any questions anytime you'd like. At the end of our presentation, though, if you would like to have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, ask the question, and then mute yourself afterward. And likewise, please feel free to share your smiling face today. We would love to see you all. So also, I'd like to mention that all of these programs are brought to you free and open to the public, though you can donate going to Green Umbrella's website, and you can even specify that those dollars go to the 2030 district, and that will help continue this kind of programming. So without further ado, I turn it over to Mark and Johnna, and and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully this comes up okay. Let me know if you have any issues. Thank you again, and good afternoon, everybody. We're excited to talk to you about what our post-pandemic predictions are and how we got there, and give you a little bit insight of what we think is coming next after this. We are from MA Architects, and for those of you not familiar with MA, we are a multidisciplinary architecture and design firm located both in Columbus and in Cincinnati. We cover a multitude of sectors, everything from workplace to multifamily to mixed use, higher education, and senior living, as well as healthcare. So we run the gamut with it. My name is Bryan. I am an associate and senior interior designer at MA, as well as a certified futurist who runs our research and innovation team. And I'll let Johnna introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Johnna Keller. I'm the sustainability manager at MA.
Right. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about what we really see happening behaviorally, and how we think that's going to change the way that we interact with each other. We're going to talk about some of the futurist perspectives and how we take what we see both from the past and current environments and overlay them together to get some predictions of what could happen. John is going to cover the sustainability component of it, as well as like how we think our communities are going to be involved with each other, and some building responses too. And then we've got some post-pandemic even design solutions that we think could happen for the workplace and businesses as well. If you do have questions, please feel free to fill them out in the chat, and as Elizabeth said, we will we'll answer them at the end of this presentation. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in to our behavioral states. And what we're going to cover first is just generationally what we are seeing, and looking at the four main generations, so boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Z, of how they have changed during this pandemic, how working from home has affected them, and what their new understanding of acceptable living modes looks like. Starting off with our boomers, this is our probably most vulnerable generation. This group has gone through many changes very rapidly in the past few months. From being able to see their friends and family to being confined to their rooms, if they're in an assisted living facility, sometimes only being able to go to the doorway. They're even trying to still figure out what their retirement looks like, because some of this generation is still working, and due to the pandemic, some of their plans have probably changed a little bit. But ironically, they are the one generation that is actually still spending similarly to they were before the pandemic. They have figured out new ways to use technology, which has allowed them to do so. Before, where they may have seen technology as something that they didn't want to use or avoid, they're now using it to interact with their families and friends and being able to shop. They still crave a face-to-face connection though. So platforms that allow them to have easy access to products and services with a human visual touch will resonate with them going forward. Up next, we have our Gen Xers. And this is the group who's probably in the unenviable position of probably being a lot of our leadership right now. Prior to this, Gen Xers were moving into the C-suite and taking over how they were changing the workplace and how it was being run. They're also now having to juggle the new work from home slash home is home slash shelter in place dynamic. They are not only leaders, but they are also parents. They're also teachers. They are also trying to take care of their employees and the mental health of their families, if not caretakers of their families within their own homes. And so right now, what they are really craving is downtime. So strategies that allow them to have that at home will become essential, and more self-care will continue to emerge for this group as we shift to whatever the new normal looks like going forward. Let's see. This group will have long-lasting effects on them based off of the pandemic, and we're going to talk specifically about one behavioral trait of how that will look for Gen Xers going forward. Millennials, just as Gen Xers, this is the second economic recession or downturn that they have gone through. The first being in 2009 really shaped how their careers were, catapulting them to be more gig workers, living much more pared down lifestyles, feeling much more acclimated to this shared living lifestyle. And so now they're going to be even more prone risk, wanting to shore up their stability, as over 50% of them have reported that they have lost their jobs or are now working less hours than they were previously. Their delayed adulthood, which we were predicting even before the pandemic, is now going to become even much more so. They were looking to rent later into their lives, into their 50s, into their 40s. And so now we're talking about even later than their 40s, and which means that they are postponing buying homes, raising families, getting married. And so this whole pandemic is going to have a shift on what their lifestyles look like going forward. Ideas with like small, mobile, flexible living will resonate very well with this group going forward. And lastly, our Gen Xers. Many have said that this generation is the generation that is ready to save the world. And I think they're already actually proving it true during this time of pandemic. Research shows that graduating during a pandemic can actually have lifelong effects on a person. And so this generation is going to need to find new ways to connect with jobs and careers. And that's what I was mentioning. There are 2 students from Brown University who actually created a new platform to connect students who had lost internships or jobs that they were getting ready to jump into after graduation. And so they are connecting them with actually virtual internships and new job possibilities across the globe, which makes it a lot easier for somebody versus trying to use their own network. This group is generally renters, just as the millennials are. And so we're going to see a shift potentially in their spatial needs, having gone through a time of pandemic where they are maybe living in a 1-bedroom house and having to work from home as well as to live there. That's probably going to make them want to change to be more of a 2-bedroom household or a studio with an adjacent workspace or an adjacent workspace nearby. As they're digital natives, they're the best ones equipped to actually use technology to connect with work friends and use the digital platforms that are being launched right now. And that will probably become preferred as we look more towards things that are low touch but high impact. So using these behavioral changes and states of the generations, what we did is we took a look and said, okay, how is this going to affect how we're going to actually be interacting with each other? As we reemerge into this world, our world is going to be different. We've gone through what we call an inflection point. The last inflection point, or one that's easy to explain, I should say, is when we went from riding horses to having cars as our main mode of transportation. That was an inflection point in history where we completely pivoted to a new modality. In many ways, our lives will be forever changed due to our new perspective on life and activities. There's going to be new habits that are being developed currently that we're going to be carrying going forward because of the new drivers and the decisions that we have to make. One thing to keep in mind is that as we discuss and look at these new patterns of behaviors, attitudinal shifts can actually happen both instantaneously and gradually. So many of what we're going to be talking about could happen tomorrow, or they could even be moving in toward 2021. So what we've done is we've, again, used our trend forecasting tools and our discussions with some of our mental health experts, as well as what we're seeing globally, as well as looking back to the past, to come up with these 4 topics that are rooted in behavioral psychology. And so the first one is space makers, PTSD in the C-suite, digital extroversion, and then mental health as well. The first one, the idea of space makers. We were already talking about boundaries before the pandemic. We were trying to figure out how we could separate ourselves acoustically as well as visually when we're in the workplace, and trying to figure out what our privacy comforts were. With the pandemic, we're going to see a shift toward more frictionless, again, low impact societies and communities where people can have the choice, option, or maybe even a regulated mandate on how their physical interactions within space and the built environment occur. I think an example of this that just recently happened is when Georgia reopened the state, and how they thought they were going to see a swarm of people go to the retail environments, and that actually did not occur. There was just an article posted about how a lot of people still prefer to stay home because they don't feel safe to return to the built environment. And so this idea of safety of space is still going to be a predominant factor going forward. We've seen things like curbside pickup, the longer drive-throughs at Starbucks, and all of the advertisements that talk about a touch-free environment, even down to our museums are now doing virtual tours so that people can still experience something, but they do it from the safety of their home. By offering this frictionless experience with high impact, makes that experience much faster and more efficient. And so it reduces the need for human contact, which would be a key in some industries being able to go forward. This by no means negates the need for an actual person-to-person experience, but allows for choice and control. A friend of mine was talking about how she went to a grocery store and there was a line out the door, and she thought it was going to be something that was very overwhelming, a long wait, and they actually made the experience positive because they had people there to talk to them, to ask them about how they could help them shop, get their groceries packaged for them so that they had a less long time in the store. Some things that we are always looking at for design considerations. So one is just that, what are the companies doing to respond with strategies that allow for no human interaction while still providing excellent service, just like that grocery store? And again, what does this look like in the built environment going forward is something that we are still exploring and looking at. Our next behavioral trend is PTSD in the C-suite. This is something that may seem a little provocative, but I think it's going to lead directly to how businesses and leaders govern. Again, our Gen Xers, who are probably most of our leadership right now, have already gone through a pandemic, or not a pandemic, but a recession before. So they're going to be much more cautious emerging from this. And whether we know it now or are willing to admit it, we're all going through trauma right now. Many of our C-suites executives have already gone through this, with the Depression era, and they're going to want to try to figure out how to be much more safer in the long run. They're going to be much more willing to take risks in the short term if it means that they are able to avoid larger losses later on. And that's going to be one of the key drivers for them going forward. These investments will be more centered around safer measures or steps rather than far-reaching ideas. So they're going to, again, be thinking about more practical things than lofty ambition ideas. Going forward, we should really consider how we're tailoring our meetings and offerings that offer safety and security in the short term and even in the long term to be able to resonate with this group. Up next, we have digital extroversion. I don't think anybody probably could say that technology hasn't been helpful right now. I'd be very surprised if that was the case. especially since we're all on a Zoom meeting right now, where normally we might be having an in-person meeting. Technology has become a source of connection and comfort, and this reliance is going to become stronger than ever as we expect technology to continue to do so going forward. We're going to want to see how technology can provide safety and comfort and control through digital interfaces and interactions. These can be done through financial opportunities that offer virtual events, distance working, monitoring of resources, or even helpful connection to others. Technology was probably talked about in divisive terms in the past, causing rise with communication. But again, now we're seeing it more as the preferred method. We're seeing, our older generations who are not familiar with it being able to talk to their families over the phone very comfortably, or being able to shop, again, comfortably using technology. And what we're really looking at going forward is how can spaces be designed to capitalize on this? How can we allow for digital interactions that still allow for the company culture or the retail environment to be predominant and something that connects with people? I think the true challenge will really be blending human connection with the digital experience. And our last topic is something that I'm very actually excited about. Again, we're dealing with trauma right now. Post-pandemic, most people have a new understanding of what anxiety truly is. And I think this will lead to the stigma of mental health care becoming a conversation of strength, as we now can respect what other people's boundaries are and understanding what their mental well-being is. And I think there's going to be many more conversations about what the mental well-being temperature is of the offices and the retail and business environments as we return to them, to make sure that people feel comfortable returning them, even if they're just an employee versus a consumer or a client. I think this could be one of the most remarkable changes going forward, especially because despite economic slowdown, there are actually reports that state spending on well-being is actually increasing right now. So that's one of the few markets that's actually still growing. And we've all found a way for self-care right now, whether it's been through baking or through crafting or some other creative aspect, which we'll talk about in just a second. But I think the coronavirus has really shown a lot on our priorities, and we are even more focused on becoming health conscious. And people will be looking for ways to help them regain control and their healthy lifestyle right now. So I think an opportunity is for businesses and leadership to come up with what their health journey looks like, and giving shape to the narrative for the employees and consumers to be interacting with. An example that I can give of this that was happening before this is Patagonia changed their entire branding strategy to be more around the environment and how we could be more better stewards with the environment. And they earned an additional, I think it was $600 million worth of revenue just based off of that messaging. And so that may be more of like a retail aspect, but you can see how that connected and resonated with a certain group. And so I think when we think about mental health, that connection is going to be even more predominant. And as I said, our ability to find new ways to be creative and to deal with our anxiety and stress led to things like baking and crafting and even, macrame, other things that were old art forms. There have been studies that actually show that the simple act of coloring can actually reduce or calm the central nervous system. Prior to the pandemic, we were actually designing what we call respite rooms that are all designed to help calm the central nervous system from its highest aroused state, which is that of a panic attack. And so we were using design psychology, lighting, textures and materials to help us find ways to reduce stress in the workplace. And I think more spaces like these are going to become predominant as we, again, re-engage, whether that's in the workplace or whether that's in the actual retail environment. And if you're interested, we actually have a blog up right now. It's by one of our architects on what safe spaces actually do. And it's rooted very much in psychology and how you can create that safe space. So if you want to continue that conversation, please feel free to check out our blog on our website. So having looked at the behaviors, having looked at what's going on right now, we're going to dive a little bit more into some of our forecasts, again, based off of our historical research. One thing that I should point out is, as futurists, what we do is we don't really technically predict anything. what we do is we look at overlapping guideposts and inflection points, and we come up with what the potential avenues are. So while we may be close with some of our predictions here, I think what we're really doing is we're just getting us moving in the right direction. And this is obviously going to evolve as we come up with new data points too, but hopefully this will give you some ideas of what we're seeing and how we're getting there. Again, just an idea of how we're getting there. What we've done is we've just taken a look at what's going on in the world, and we've compared it to what's happened post other pandemics. So again, the low touch curve pick up what we're trying to do for at-home entertainment with our families and our children, how we're looking at health and wellness and how we're prioritizing going outside. This idea that digital reliance and higher expectations is going to go forward. And then the 3 C's are something that we're really focusing on, and that's comfort, choice, and control. And those are going to be key elements going forward for us to be able to be successful. The idea of what we're comfortable with, allowing us the choice to choose that, and then having the control to say, here's what I will be doing. So with that, we're going to talk about our first big forecast. And that is this idea of pop-up celebrations. We've all gone through this time of shutdown together. And with that, we've lost experiences with friends. We've lost being able to celebrate with coworkers when they've hit major milestones. We've lost being able to go to weddings and graduations. I mean, just on the news this last weekend, just seeing OSU's band playing, for the graduating staff was something that was a different experience. And so this idea that we're all going to want to take what we've gone through, the trauma that we've gone through, and replace that loss with something new, I think is going to be very exciting to people. We did a survey of our office of over 100 people and basically said, after the coronavirus is done and you're able to go back, what's the first thing you want to do? Most people said they want to go to a restaurant. And I think what that is because they want to get out, they want to see other people, and they want to get back to being engaged in the community. Now, I do think, again, thinking about comfort, choice, and control, we're going to see people want to do that in small groups too. So I don't think it's going to be a mass block party, if you will. But I think that's going to put more focus on what's happening in our neighborhoods that allow for those celebrational moments to occur. And so again, thinking about small doses, I think we'll be seeing some of these replacement celebrations going forward. Up next is something that we're calling rewilding of humanity. If anybody is familiar with rewilding, it really comes from something that we talk about right now when we do urban planning and development. And the idea is that rewilding is about restoring natural processes. Right now we're living in the era of the Anthropocene, where we as mankind are affecting nature more than the natural processes actually infect the environment. And so this idea of rewilding humanity really centers around what the return of our culture means, what we'll be aware of, and what we will make our new normal to be. This attention to returning natural processes will force us to focus on how we can be better. We've all seen what's happened since we've been sheltering in place. We're seeing stories about no smog in LA, about being able to see the Himalayas in India, about the air in China being clean, the canals in Venice are clear and clean. And so I think all of this is just going to focus our attention on, again, what we're good stewards of the environment, what our carbon footprint is going to be. I think it's going to lead to more focuses on local production and locally grown and locally sourced that are introducing more local urbanism that builds community in small segments. And I think many people are going to be asking, or are asking right now, if we're going to be returning to what we had before. And I think there will be moments of that. But I think overall, people will have seen that there's a different way to do things, whether that's working, shopping, or taking care of the family unit in the house. And so I think that's going to pivot to new ways of living and producing. Continuing on with that, right now, we're seeing some of our retail centers offer specifically timed, specific times where different generations can come and they can engage with those retail environments at that time to keep them socially distant. Malls in China were already doing this. Some of them were already opening up to allow senior citizens to come and interact and have a community when it was in their off-peak hours. And so I think we're going to be seeing, again, small doses of returns to things where we will return to some of the built environments of our retail lives, but we'll be coming at it from a much more timed aspect. One thing we were talking about with a local restaurateur is just how are they going to allow people back into their restaurants, and what does that look like? Is it really much more of you have a reserved time slot and you have to be there at that time slot? And if you're not, then you've lost your seat. So that way you can control the flow of people coming in. You know, we're redefining what our touch looks like right now. In many cultures in society, you know, touch was a pivotal connection from a human to human contact standpoint. And right now I believe that the handshake is gone. I think we're going to see many more things that, like, you know, we're talking right now about how hearing another person's voice might be the primary means of connecting human to human versus being able to give them a hug or giving them a high five. Along with all this rewilding and new cultural processes, we've all found a way to manage our day through our daily life. And I think we're going to want to keep some of those habits that we've formed going forward, whether it's in our offices or just in our daily routine, so that we're keeping the planned breaks and the self-care involved. Little by little, we will find a new normal, but again, it will be about providing comfort and control and choice and flexibility as we explore this new world modality. And I've been saying it several times, but again, comfort, choice, and control. So those are going to be the key elements to help people as they come out of this to feel like they can have success going forward. Overall, while we still want to see our friends, we want to be able to control when and where and how many. Again, the pop-up celebrations will help reignite culture, as well as provide thoughtful messaging to employees. And then choice-based work is not something that is new, but I think it's going to become much more ingrained into many different modes of our current living lifestyle. So with those big ideas, we came up with just 3 big predictions and consequences from the coronavirus. And that's this idea of localvists, repurposing assets, and then digitization. A surefire trend going forward is the demand for goods and services that are close to home, that require little travel or commute and are immediately accessible and are safe. We've all had a shelter in place, and people are living you know, in different types of communities. Some of them may have access to public transportation that might have been their main mode of getting to work before. And I think right now our transportation industry is going to have to do some major changes in order for people to feel comfortable to use the bus, to be able to use the subway, because I don't think they're going to want to be packed into tightly crammed spaces. And so again, we may be seeing things where people want to go to a local coffee shop because it's close to their home and they feel much more safe doing that. And I think our local businesses are ripe to offer people what they're wanting, and that's transparency and stability, because local resources can provide tracking information on where goods are made and how they're handled and where they come from. This provides comfort to those knowing that limited hands have touched those goods, and a comfort to know that disruption of that produced good is less likely to happen. I think we'll see opportunities for creating rotating pop-up spaces within our neighborhoods and our communities. I definitely think our neighborhoods are going to be much more of a focus versus the larger city aspect as we gently reemerge in small doses and waves. I think neighborhoods could become much more a place where we have, again, those pop-up spaces that allow for maybe a pharmacy to come one day, or a retailer to come in next day, or a food service offering to come the other day, so that they can have those accesses to the goods and services, but in a much closer location. And I think it could even delve into medical care becoming much more mobile or on demand, even delivered to our door. What we should be focusing on right now is how personalized services can provide locally relevant experiences, as these are safety nets for people to fall into as we reemerge from shelter in place. Up next is repurposing assets. And where this stems from is about thinking about how a lot of our spaces stand empty right now. And this idea of a singular use space is probably not going to make much sense from a real estate standpoint. So allowing spaces that can pivot and have flexibility, have use during off hours, be given a repurpose and a reinvention is something that I think we'll see more of, just having that flexibility of space. Especially as we think about reentering the workspace, and people may not have the childcare come back online immediately. And so I think we're going to see some pivots in how our current offices are repurposed and reworked as well. We've all come to rely on technology again. And so this last point is really about digitization and how we're going to see much more things that are tech first versus it being about human to human, face-to-face interaction. One thing that we are talking about is what are meetings going to look like going forward. And so I think we'll see a lot of them face-to-face interactive, but then also half of them will still be done virtually. I think pushing AR and VR is going to be a catalyst for a lot of different things to change, like how we interact with each other, how we interact with our clients and with our business. Right now, we're talking about more of this idea of augmented intelligence, where the helpful devices that we have around our home can actually help alleviate some of our daily routines that can give us more time for either self-care or time with our family. And so we've moved away from this idea that technology is really bad and that AI is going to replace us, to seeing how it can be much more helpful when we are in situations such as this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Johnna so she can speak about sustainability.
Thanks, Mark. So it's no surprise that globally we're seeing health and wellness emerge as a top priority, and necessarily so right now. This will remain a priority as we absorb our new reality and as we imagine our built environment, especially as we start to reopen. And there are some key areas we anticipate strengthening as we emerge on the other side of this pandemic crisis. Elements like mindfulness, like cleaning and air filtration, restoring nature, and our connections with each other. Next slide, please. So it's important to understand our new relationship with trauma, to recognize our need for emotional well-being, and to provide opportunities for respite. With trauma, it's especially important for us to recognize that we're currently going through a crisis, and what we're feeling is very real. We as industry professionals, as a community, and as a nation, will discover new ways to manage our stress and will emerge more resilient. So key factors in becoming more resilient and more mindful are the ways that we find to reduce our stress, to support ourselves emotionally, and to maintain a good work-life balance. To alleviate stress and anxiety, a priority will be to incorporate more moments in areas for respite, spaces that allow us to just reset and to restore ourselves. This increases our overall happiness and productivity. Currently, we all have this heightened sensitivity to people, to surfaces, to being just outside the safety of our homes. And we need to address that in the built environment so that as we go back, everyone feels safe and productive. Next slide, please. To help us feel safe, and we're already seeing a lot of this, is this concept of what is clean, what lacks germs, will be a priority. It is a priority. Essential factors to achieve this are hand washing, cleaning policies, and air quality. In direct response to COVID-19, we've experienced a shift towards more rigorous cleaning. I think we've all seen this. That starts with our hands, really. We're controlling those things that we can control. And we're really good at washing our hands now, right? So how might we address that in the built environment? And I think maybe sinks might get pushed out from behind where they are now. We're traditionally behind closed doors and sort of more private, secluded areas, to getting those sinks out to be more accessible for hand washing on a more frequent basis, especially during cold and flu season. We've also increased the rigor and frequency of our cleaning protocols, especially with high touch surfaces like door handles, light switches, and even our phones. And this may spark a renewed interest in no touch or sensor technologies like automatic faucets at the sink. And for some of you who may be considering antimicrobial finishes, I'd like you to consider the long-term health effects of that before deciding on antimicrobial finishes as the sort of end-all be-all. because the efficacy hasn't really been proven. And, you know, I would sort of just encourage more rigorous cleaning protocols with actually green cleaning chemicals. Under air quality, so I think clean environments make us think about air quality, right? Especially air filtration and purification. Well, we have seen the desire for increased ventilation in places that are reopening. I think operable windows make it more consideration now to get more fresh air in. We may also see just interest in newer technologies like bipolar ionization. And this is an air purification technology where charged ions bind with contaminants in the air so that they're effectively neutralized. In the case of bacteria and viruses, this actually damages the cell structure, making them not dangerous to us. And while we don't have studies on COVID-19 yet, we do have studies on similar viruses, and we've seen reduction rates in upwards of 90% or higher in as little as 30 to 60 minutes. So something like this really deserves some extra exploration. Next slide, please. So restoring nature. Now, key takeaways here are a new interest in biophilic design, the importance of outdoor recreation and the potential for more bikeways, also a renewed dependence on local farms and community-supported agriculture. For those of you who don't know what biophilic design is or is a new term for you, it's more than just green walls. It's great. Biophilic designers are designing with our innate connection to nature. And it's more than just bringing plant life into a building. It's really about how we feel in nature. Nature is able to evoke an emotional response within us. So bringing that idea into the design of buildings, bringing that into the built environment through things like proportions and geometry of space, through light and shadow, through a sense of mystery and intrigue, is really what biophilic design is about. So I think a lot of us have sort of realized that our connections with nature are more important than ever as we work from home. So like just hearing birds chirping outside our windows, which we don't probably normally get to hear on our normal work day, having our pets nearby, seeing coworkers' pets in Zoom meetings. I really think that's the highlight of every Zoom meeting, is seeing my coworkers' pets. Being able to just step outside for a moment of fresh air and sun is just kind of feels refreshing and allows me to sort of refocus and to recharge, and it gives me just a moment to reflect on what I'm working on. So never before has nature really been so critical to our emotional well-being, and just being connected with our communities. Being outside also feels freeing in this sort of otherwise restricted world that we're in. And I see more people in my neighborhood out walking and biking and running. Our public parks have really become places of sort of hope and connection, inspiring us to not only protect our green spaces, but also increase those opportunities for outdoor recreation. And hopefully this will spark an interest in expanding our parks and recreational areas. And of course, the built infrastructure that supports those places. You've probably seen some cities close what are now empty roadways for bike use only, allowing more of us to safely bike around, to be able to move our bodies and to feel connected to our communities in ways that we can't normally when we drive a car. And maybe this will encourage more biking and support the infrastructure necessary for safer pedestrian travel in general. Seeing empty shelves in grocery stores has demonstrated the value of local food production through small and locally owned farms and community-supported agriculture. Local nurseries and seed suppliers have noticed an increase in sales for home gardens. I've seen a lot of my neighbors prepping their gardens for this summer, and I think it's going to be an amazingly beautiful summer in my neighborhood. People are just investing in local and in resilience and being self-sufficient. Next slide, please. As our mindsets shift toward this sort of slow down where we appreciate the things that we value most, people will really embrace that back to basics approach to their life, connecting with family, supporting our local communities. This shift toward slow movement is allowing the earth to heal. It's allowing CO2 emissions to drop. And for us to really find those things that we value most, whether that be in nature or with other people in a virtual way, we have an opportunity here to build on those elements that we value most and to be able to emerge on the other side of this crisis better and more resilient. Connecting with our families and our friends and our communities has been critical for the emotional support and the human connection we all need. And this is sparking new and creative ways to communicate. My mom, who lives in South Carolina, is getting pretty good at FaceTime and Zoom and actually some online card games. And I really hope that this means that we can stay more connected after we emerge from this crisis. This pandemic crisis is also revealing the current disparities in our local communities and how we've come together to help one another, not just on a community level, but on a national scale. And that community aid and that support are really key factors in community resilience and sustaining us for a prosperous future. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Johnna. So with that, we thought real quick, we'd kind of go through some just actionable items. It's always great to have these big ideas, but we wanted to make sure that you had some things to think about going forward. So the first thing is the workplace and how that's changing. We're seeing much more digital interactions first. Again, thinking about how meetings are going to occur. Probably in the short run, you'll have half and half virtual, half in person. Having more agile teams. We've all figured out how to work from home, and some of us have been successful and some of us have not. And so giving the choice for people who want to work from the workplace is a great opportunity, but still allowing people to work remotely. And then giving them a choice of where they want to sit too, so they can have that choice. One thing we're talking about are these culture care packages where maybe it's something that's delivered to the home if you are working from home, or you have it at the office so that everybody has the same platform of technology and devices going forward. But also those culture care packages could have things that are of cleaning nature so that when you come into the office, you're able to clean your own workstation if you are doing much more of a non-assigned desk agile dynamic. I definitely think we're going to be seeing a lot more changes to our lobbies and our entrancing sequences going forward. And then again, just this idea of flexible use, asset usage, how our offices and other spaces can be used during the second shifts. Even, something about maybe more of like a true 24/7 work cycle where people who are not able to come back to the work immediately because of childcare services, they might still need to work off hours, and still allowing that and what that dynamic looks like going forward. We do have a blog up on our website that does talk a little bit about this in more in depth of what we think is going to happen in 3 days, 3 months, and then 3 years going forward in the workplace. And so just bullet pointing that a little bit more. Again, thinking in the short term about what the commute plan is for your employees, how they're going to becoming safely to the office, creating an entry plan for the employees and guests, making sure that you have them maybe focused into one area through the lobby versus multiple entry points. What your socially distanced plan looks like, taking over training spaces that may be not utilized in the short term because of not wanting to gather in larger spaces. And so revamping that to allow people to have socially distanced work areas, allowing for agility so that people can work how they work and when they want to work, because we all work differently. Focusing on the company culture engagement is going to be key. So making sure you understand how you're building that community with whether it's your corporate give back programs or just engagement of those pop-up celebrations. And again, I think leadership needs to be very cognizant of addressing fears with transparency and stability as employees are re-engaged. And then in the long run, maybe retrofit for safety and cleanliness, maybe our HVAC systems change, maybe our lobbies change, implementing more touchless procedures. We're already looking into what that touchless restroom wants to look like so that we don't have to worry about that going forward. And then maybe even creating workplace hubs where if people still want to work close to their home, but they want to have a business dynamic, they can go to a hub that allows them to do so. And then just more in terms of the changing retail business dynamics, again, becoming locally sourcing, I think will be key. Low touch and high engagement. So thinking about how we are interacting with people, whether it's through technology or even in person to person, but that is still safe and clean. Asset pivoting, One of the best examples I can give of that is thinking about BrewDog and how they started to come up with a secondary product offering that they could, in the long run, maybe sell as a second product for them during times of crisis. And so what is the offerings? What are the things that are sitting empty right now that could be reutilized or revamped in a different way to help create a second product offering? And then just new product partnerships. Going forward, again, pairing up local with national organizations to provide the same offerings, maybe just in a slightly different twist, depending on how that is sourced. So again, short term, creating limited in-store experience, still having the store, but it's maybe much more digitally focused. Developing a delivery offering. Food trucks, I think, are going to be much more of a modality right now, as they can come into neighborhoods and then leave the neighborhoods and offer you to stay within the confines of your safety net. Finding new local sources and locations to engage with, and defining your values and what's important for you to communicate to the people, whether you're employee, business, or consumer or client. And then in the long term, just redevelopment of the physical space to allow for virtual interaction, offering secondary products to change from waste to reuse, and then developing those local pop-up locations to engage with the community where they are. So that is our presentation for today. So hopefully that struck a chord with you and something that you found interesting, and hopefully something that you can use going forward. With that, I will turn it back over to Tom and Elizabeth and see if we have any questions.
We have one question. What can owners do to help their workforce feel safe right now? And kind of with that, how do you see flexible workspaces working in this new normal when people start to go back?
Sure. So I touched on it a little bit. It really comes down to that transparency and stability. So here's the transparency of, here are the steps that we're going to take so that we know what the game plan is going to be, very open and honest about the communication that what steps we're taking, whether it's your cleaning practices, whether it's you're only going to be allowing certain employees to come in waves or on off hours, how you're retrofitting the office in the short term to allow people to still maintain social distancing, which pairs up to what you're talking about with the agile workspace. So before all of this, we were seeing much more about hoteling stations, which are smaller footprints, which are really packed tight together. Well, now that we're all working from home, not everybody's going to need to come back to the office, which is going to allow us to take some of those hoteling stations and spread them apart. And I think we might see some people who used to be pilers like myself become much more conscious of how much work surface they have and use less of it, because they want to be able to clean it each day that they come in. Again, especially if they are doing more of an agile where you get to choose where you work and when you want to work, whether it's at a high top table in the cafe or in a different location.
Yeah, one of the thoughts that I had, or, you know, I don't know if the employers will think about having little kits or packets for their employees as they come into a new workspace. If they have a flexible workspace, you know, if they're offering some way for each person to individually clean, you know, the surface so that they feel comfortable, at least in the area that they are. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yep.
I have a question, if that's okay. So Mark, with the, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but with everyone, so many more people working remotely now, and companies potentially seeing overhead reduction in not having office spaces if everybody's suddenly comfortable working from home, do you think that could eventually lead to a decreased demand for office space?
There's two thoughts, right? So one is you look at companies like Nationwide who's already doing it, and they're already starting to reduce their office footprint because they can, and that makes sense because they have a lot of people who work remotely, and now they've got platforms in place to do so. I think what we'll probably see is we'll see spacing out of workstations to allow for more social distancing, And what that'll do is it'll eat up some of the footprint that we were gaining back by the people who still are able to work from home. So I think it's going to be a push and pull and dynamic. And really it's based on what how the team works best. And that's what we do when we do our workplace projects. We dive into what the team needs and creating those spaces just for that team. It's not so much just about the individual as much as how the team dynamic really wants to function.
Thanks.
We got a question in the chat inbox. David, do you want to just ask it out loud? Would you be so kind?
And you were talking about Localvists. I believe you had mentioned like maybe a pharmacy could pop up one day and maybe a grocery store pop up another. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it kind of goes along with thinking about what our neighborhoods and communities are going to be. So within our neighborhood, people are much more comfortable with walking around, you know, our one secure little area. And so the idea really stemmed from the thought of like, I've been hearing of neighborhoods who are inviting food trucks to come on a rotating basis, and how that might be something of much more of a digestible retail opportunity for some of the businesses who have a brick and mortar store, but would still get to the community who doesn't want to go into that brick and mortar store. And so the idea is, you know, maybe in our smaller like local parks, we could have areas that on a Monday, you've got pharmacy, on a Tuesday, you've got your dry cleaning services there, and it's a rotating service opportunity. So it's something that would just be a small footprint that somebody could go into. Maybe if it's a food truck, great. If not, it's just more of a stand and they can do what they need to do. It's something that I think would be an interesting development to look into. Does that explain what, does that help?
Yeah, it's kind of like a farmer's market kind of thing, but every day is a new business or like a new stand, so to speak.
Yeah, and it also stemmed from, before this, we were also talking about how creating micro silos where people work and live, and how we're seeing some places have you know, residential up above, workplace in the middle, and then retail on the lower floors. And this idea that there could be like a white box retail space that allows for the resources to come to that area at different times of the day, so that people don't have to leave to go see maybe again, the pharmacy, the dentist, or whatever that service wants to be, that is often, maybe it takes a drive, so you have to give up your lunch break in order to go there versus being able to take a lunch or just go downstairs to have that service.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just wondering what sort of skills or softwares, things that a worker such as myself could do to become more proficient and more useful, more flexible and generally desirable to employers in the future as pertains to what we're seeing now with remote working and these sorts of things. What can I learn today that will make myself most advantageous or more attractive in general in this world that is more and more remote, software driven, and these sorts of things?
Sure. I think a lot of it would be technology based. I think as we go back to think about what that augmented intelligence looks like, we're developing processes right now that can allow AI to maybe learn how we are answering certain emails, so that we don't have to always just reply to those certain emails the same way multiple times throughout the day. Thinking about what the future of the AR or VR meeting looks like is something that I think will be very attractive to people, so that they can feel like they have a actual in-person experience, but it's through technology. So we call it kind of like upskilling. I think it also depends on what your passion is around too, because it's kind of hard to just sit here and say what, you know, would be a blanket statement. You know, because one thing that we've been talking about is like, what happens to the restaurant workers? You know, are they going to want to upskill themselves so that they can have a second thing to pivot to, so that they become maybe like part-time caregivers, so that way if they need to go through a pandemic again, they could also work in a hospital. So it may be thinking about what your secondary passion is that could be done in a situation like this, and then maybe expanding on that further, which may seem a little bit vague, but I definitely think the technology is going to be one thing to explore, as well as locally resourced opportunities.
Well, thank you, everyone. We all appreciate you guys being here, and thank you to Johnna and Mark. We appreciate your presentation today, and hope you all have a good week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.